This is the new Venom Spice Factory. So Spice Factory is a new commercial oscillator from Venom. It's inspired by the Future Sound Systems Recombination Engine module, and it's a part of the Oscillations commercial collection, which includes Sophia's Daughter. And I want to quickly show you the main idea behind the Spice Factory. So the technique behind this module is based on wave splicing, which is switching between two oscillators with a third oscillator at audio rates. So let's say a sine and a saw wave. Now I can crossfade between them. In this case, I'm using the fade module from VCV. So all the way left is sine. All the way right, it's saw, right, as you can see here. And again, I can switch between them with the pulse wave, again at audio rates with a third oscillator here. And of course, the tunings will very much change the result. Let me see if we can get something a bit that's easier to see here, right? So now I can detune them. Right, and get a more unique result. Right, and the pulse width of this pulse wave will very much change the outcome. So we get more of the sine or more of the saw. And also using a different shape instead of a pulse will give us audio rate cross-fading instead of switching, which will also change the result. So let's say a triangle wave. Right, it's a bit smoother than square or pulse. Right, and this is the main idea, but of course it gets much deeper than that. And here we have the three oscillators. So we have the slice, which will do the switching between the two spice oscillators. Right, already here we have something interesting. Each oscillator is unipolar. We can create a mix of the waves. So if, for example, I bring in the sine wave, right, from the positive spice, you see we have a unipolar positive. If I bring in the sine from the negative spice, we have unipolar negative. Right, and again we can have a mix of both. And actually you can clearly hear that it's not really a sine, because we switch between them at audio rates with the pulse wave, just like as we've seen before. So already we can detune them slightly from one another. If I hold Control and Shift, I can just detune them a bit. Right, I can even change the octave. So for example, the negative spice will go an octave up. Maybe add some saw wave on both of them. We have here also a mix level control. Right, so now it's also mixed with a bit of saw. Again, we have pulse width for the square wave. Right, for the slice, so we can modulate this. Right, and get even more movement. And we can even modulate the levels of the positive and negative spices. Right, so if I take this down, we have here dedicated control, CV control. Right, so I can bring this in and out. We have here also dedicated outputs for the slice oscillator, right, that we can use for adding stability by mixing it in here in the external input. Right, so if for example I take the triangle wave to the external input, I can mix it in here at the output, again just for adding stability. So the positive and the negative will change their levels, but the triangle wave will always stay there, will always drone. Right, now I can add some effects, like for example chorus, and I have here a modulated low pass filter. Right, we can turn this even into a bass if we take the slice maybe 2 octaves down. Listen to this. Right, now we also have the individual outputs for each of the spice oscillators. Right, so the individual wave outputs will be without the effects of the switch. So if, for example, I use here two saw waves, and let me solo this for a second. Right, you see we just get saw waves. They have no influence from the slice oscillator here. But if we use the mix outputs and then bring in the saw waves just before the half point, just before the 50% here, now we have the effect of the slice again from the mix outputs. Right, so if for example I sequence the slice, I have here the Benjamin oscillator used as a sequencer in this case. Right, this will sequence for now the slice and both spices because I have here spice track on. If I turn it off, only the slice will move with the sequence and the positive and negative spices will just stay droning, but again I can activate the tracking and then all three oscillators move with the same sequence. Let me add some delay here. This is going, by the way, through a bandpass filter. Now if we go beyond the half point, we also get the waves without switching. So here I have another sequence. Let me solo this for a second with a step sequencer. And if I bring the sign of the positive spice, right, again, before the half point, we still get the effect of the slice, but the more I bring it above the 50%, we start getting a clean sine wave. Right, you can see this also here on the scope if I bring the gain a bit. Right, again, now it's without the effect of the slice. Right, and we can get everything in between. Right, so this can be interesting to modulate. So I'm going to use here random voltage to modulate the level of the sine of the positive, the level of the sine of the negative. Right, so sometimes they will be affected by the switching, sometimes not. I can also modulate the FM. We have FM dedicated FM input on each of the spices. Right, so 1 and 2, and just slightly again by holding Control and Shift, just adding a bit of modulation. Right, just to get a bit more movement. I'm sending this through two low-pass filters that I'm going to close and modulate in opposite directions, just to get some stereo movement here. Like with other oscillators in this collection, we have different ways of affecting and modulating the sound. In this case, we have phase modulation, FM, even through 0 FM, and even amplitude modulation. So here I'm sequencing Spice Factory with slips. Right, and first of all, just like I showed you in the introduction, if we don't use a pulse wave for switching between the oscillators, if I go with something like a triangle wave, I can right-click the wave and then choose triangle. Now it will cross-fade between the waves at audio rates instead of switching between them. So now with the triangle we get every value also in between. And the nice thing here is that even though we use a triangle wave, we still have pulse width control. Let me bring the level up. Right, we still have pulse width modulation even for the triangle wave, or the sine, or the saw, depends what you want to use. Right, so I can modulate this. I'm using here the modulation from slips, sending it through a slew limiter just to smoothen it out a bit. Right, so now we have also pulse width modulation. And again, we have a selection of modulation inputs that we can utilize for for example, we can utilize the individual outputs for feedback modulation, which is always fun. So for example, I can take the saw output here from the negative spice and modulate the sign, the phase of the sign of the positive. Right, again, just for adding a bit of texture. And we can even add movement to this if we send this first through a VCA. I have here the quad VC polarizer also from Venom, and I'm modulating it with random voltage. So if I use a modulated VCA, we can have even movement here. We can also use the mix output here of the positive spice, which is again after the switching to modulate in turn the phase of, let's say, the triangle of the negative spice. And again, I will go first through a modulated VCA. We can also process things externally before sending them back. So I can use, for example, a wave folder, again, also from Venom, to process the triangle from the main slice oscillator, and then use this to modulate the phase of the sign of the negative spice. And again, let's do this after a modulated or through a modulated VCA. Right, add another level of complexity. I will add some delay to this. I have here the echo or sapphire. Now we can of course use also external modulation. Here I have a rhythmic bass. Let me solo this with different rhythms. I'm using here the Rhythm Explorer again from Venom to generate different rhythms, and I'm using 3 envelopes, right, to bring in once the positive spice, the negative spice, and the main slice through the external input, right? So we have 3 different rhythms. And as we've seen before, we have FM for each of the spices, right, or the spice oscillators, and this can be exponential like we did before to add a bit of detuning, or if I click this here, the linear, this can be also linear through 0. So I have here 2 XM operators again from Venom that I'm going to use to modulate the FM. They get different rhythms again from the Rhythm Explorer, right? So I'm just adding sorts of accents. Right, so it adds another percussive element. And I can also use the FM here on the main slice oscillator. Also here we have linear through 0, or we have exponential, which can be nice for adding sort of punch with another envelope. So I'm going to use another envelope for this. Right, and add punch to the sound. And again, we have amplitude modulation. Right, we have CV input for the level of almost everything here on the module. Again, let me solo this. Right, so I just have here another drone. And I'm cross-modulating things. So for example, the sign from the negative is modulating the level of the sign of the positive. The sign of the positive is modulating the level of the sign of the negative. So cross-fading, cross-feedback modulation, amplitude modulation. Right, I'm also using here an external oscillator, the VCO unit, to modulate the levels here. Also the square is modulating the levels here from the slice. Right, so really you can experiment also with amplitude modulation. This is going through a bandpass filter and some delay. And the interesting thing also that I'm doing here is I'm using a copy of one of the outputs of the delay, sending it back to the external input here on Spice Factory. So I'm creating feedback. Right, things will be processed in a feedback loop. This adds this nice resonant, throaty tone to everything. Right, and again I'm modulating the level here just to have a bit more movement. course, Spice Factory is also polyphonic, so it's really easy to create chords that are full of movement. Here I have a harmony 2 from Squintronics creating or generating a 6-note chord. Right, and of course the CV inputs, the various CV inputs are also polyphonic. So I have here the Quad LFO from Surge XT. It's set to 6 channels of polyphony. So we get from each output here 6 different random sources. So I can modulate, for example, the levels of the positive and negative slices. Right, again, polyphonically, so per voice. Also, of course, the pulse width is polyphonic. So we can have polyphonic pulse width modulation. You can even add a polyphonic FM, exponential FM for a bit of wobble. Again, this will happen per voice. And actually, for adding even more wobble and tape-like sound, I'm using here the delay from MuseX. Just to have a bit more movement here. And we can also use Spice Factory as a complex LFO. Here I have another one with cross modulation, as we've seen before. Right, just modulating things, using feedback modulation. Right, and I can set it now to run slowly if I click this here. Already something useful is that oversampling will turn off automatically, so it will save CPU, no need for oversampling when using it as an LFO. Right, and here you can see the shape that we are getting. Again, quite a unique shape. This will modulate a filter, a low-pass filter here that I'm using with the VCO unit. You can hear the modulation. Let's change this even a bit, make this maybe slower. Right, we can add more saw here. Right. Get complex, unique LFO shapes. We can also just use the slice at lower rates and crossfade between, for example, 2 sequences. This is also quite interesting. So here I really have 2 sequences. It's sequencing, they are sequencing only the Spice oscillators. Right, let me solo this for a second. It will sound a bit weird at first. Right, because still we have the effect of the slice. Right, and I'm not sequencing the slice, I'm just sequencing the positive and negative spices, but we can take the slice all the way down here, so it's not anymore at audio rates. You can really hear the switching. Right, but with offset, if I send offset to the volt per octave, we can take it even lower. Right? And now it will still switch, but again we can use different waves. For example, if I use a sine wave, it will crossfade now between the positive and negative spices. Right, so we get an interesting effect. Again, in this case, just a slice is running at lower rates. We still have audio rates on the negative and positive spices with 2 sequences. But again, how this module works, how this oscillator works, now it crossfades between the positive and negative spices. I'm going to add here some panning with the fade from VCV. I have here a modulated bandpass filter. And again, a delay. Right, and there is one more thing I want to show you, and that's it for today. We have here the Spice skew function. Again, let me solo this. Right, the Spice skew, if I turn it on, the pulse width of the slice will affect also the rate of the positive, or the frequency of the positive and the negative spices, moving them in opposite directions, and you can really find interesting sweet spots there. Right, again, let me show you without. This is just pulse width, but with spice Q. We'll also change the rate of the spice oscillators, and let's try and find a nice sweet spot here. Right, maybe something like this. Right, so we get lots of movement. This just needs to be drowned in reverb and add some distortion to it. Right, to get a nice drone here. And that was it for today. I hope I could show you how much potential this module has. Once again, Venom did an amazing job creating something truly unique. Thank you for watching. Cheers!